court-related announcements. Is there something you're going to address here?
I just have one item for court this morning, Judge.
Okay.
Item C3, we are withholding that. The group Texas Freedom Network has withdrawn their property use application, so we are no longer asking the court to take any action on that request.
All right, thank you.
That's all I have, sir.
So, a couple of items. And to the members of the media that called our office yesterday and emailed many times over, I have multiple meetings set up during the week, meetings to deal with transportation-related issues, jail-related issues, multiple other related issues. I'm sorry that I cannot drop what I'm doing and cancel meetings to get to all of you. We tried to respond to a few. I will be happy to address comments and concerns. We'll take you one at a time in my office after this meeting concludes, whenever that may be. The other thing related to this agenda, just so this is clear, and anyone can speak up and say whatever they want on the Commissioner's Court about it. At the conclusion of the last meeting, I had a commissioner come to me, Commissioner Fickus, tell me that he was confused on a vote he made, which is understandable. It happens, and it may happen to all of us when we get into our senior years. And he asked me, what can I do to address this immediately? I voted the wrong way, can I change my vote? And I said, well, we're adjourned. No, you cannot. And what can we do to hurry up and address it? And I said, I can call a special meeting. So he asked the county administrator to put it on the agenda. That's why I called a special meeting. It requires a physical quorum to have a special meeting, which is 3 people. Anyone can attend this meeting virtually, as you see Commissioner Simmons has. I asked the county administrator to reach out to each member of the court to see if they cared whether the voting locations was on this meeting or next Tuesday's meeting. One court member said, yes, why don't we do it so we don't show up for just one? And I was specifically thinking of the Democrats when I asked, for those of you who are wondering. One of them, Commissioner Brooks, said he didn't care which day it was. That was what he responded to the county administrator. And Commissioner Simmons didn't give an answer one way or the other, as was relayed to me by the county administrator. So if Commissioner Brooks wanted to be here today, he could. He has another commitment apparently that he thinks is more important than this, and I'm not judging whether it is or it isn't. If we have any more of that, I will literally clear the entire courtroom immediately, and you can come in one at a time. There will be no more outbursts. That was not meant to be an insult at Commissioner Brooks. He's not here. Regardless, if he had called me and asked, I've got a commitment at X time or Y time, would you move it to noon? Would you move it to 3? I would have gladly moved it. That's why we're here today. That's where we are. And a vote from the screen virtually counts just as much as a vote if you're sitting at the podium. So I will make sure she has every opportunity to speak whenever she wants to speak in accordance with all of our rules. So now that I have laid that out, the first item on the agenda, A1, consideration of early voting sites for the general election on November 5th, 2024. Mr. Ludwig.
Good morning, Judge, Commissioners. I have here before you presented 3 additional items to what was presented last Tuesday. One thing of note, when we get started, the original list last Tuesday only included 50 locations. Since then, we were able to add an additional location. My staff is very excited about the location because it fills a gap where we had lost a location earlier this year and we had a hole. This location will help fill that. So we now have 51 locations, and the new one lies on the border between Dalworthington Garden and Pantego, and it kind of fills a space there. So that is the main difference with everything that I'll be presenting is that one location.
And what I would ask you to do for the court and the public is go over all 3 of the options you've presented and give a brief overview of what those options contain as they have changed from the original one that was presented that was not passed.
Correct, Judge. So option one, we simply, hearing the feedback from the conversation, went back and I looked at any instance where we had two polling locations within 1.5 miles of each other. So the stacked on top of each other issue. When I looked at those, what I did is I went back to the 2020 presidential election. The location that had the lowest turnout between the two is the location that I put on the list to recommend to be removed. That was option one. Option two, we simply went back and looking at efficiency and numbers, what were the lowest turnout locations in 2020? And those locations are what you see in option two. Option three is simply every commissioner precinct has the exact same number of polling locations. The recommendation that I put in there was the locations that had the lowest turnout in those precincts would be the ones to remove to get us to the number of 12. Because I don't have anything else to add, so I can't get us to 14. So the only way to make them match is everybody have 12. And with that, I can answer any questions.
So I want to make sure what I say out loud is accurate so everybody understands it. Option one, you removed 5 locations from the original plan, and of the 5 locations you removed, they were all within 1.5 miles or less of another voting location, and you added one that was not previously presented.
Correct.
Okay. Option two, you had the same one you added, which is at the former Junior League of Arlington.
It's in the vicinity of, it's at the Vietnamese American Community Home.
Okay, and it is inside precinct 2, is that accurate?
Correct, it is inside precinct 2.
And option 2, you have removed the 5 lowest turnout locations, added the Vietnamese Community Center. That's what's different from the one you presented last Tuesday.
Correct.
Option 3 is just what you have come up with to where each single precinct has the same number of locations if you remove these 2 in precinct 1 and this one in precinct 3.
That is correct, Judge.
Okay. All right. Any questions from commissioners?
Yeah, Clint, I asked you this whenever we spoke on Friday. Your recommendations on these sites and the criteria that you use, I'm interested in hearing your objective criteria on how you set these sites and how you recommend them to us. What's your criteria?
So the original criteria goes back to 2019 when they established the countywide polling program, and there's a whole list. It was submitted, and we looked at, they looked at distance, populations, and spaces available. Clearly, since then, there has been some changes to that because of locations we lose. Sometimes, like the instance we had this year where they sold the building, no longer available, had to find something else. So they do shift a little bit. The goal is to try to maintain the coverage around the county and give everybody the opportunity to vote during early voting. The other big change occurred in 2020 with the addition of adding all campuses to that list. That's when the dispersion was changed a little bit, and we ended up with these college campuses right next to an already existing polling location. So that decision was made in 2020.
Okay, so what we saw in the election day sites also, and it's the same in early voting, what we saw in these sites is that they're not balanced and equal amongst the commissioner precincts. Are you saying that that's a function of them not, I guess you not being able to find sites? But is there any threshold that you're trying to hit? It would make a whole heck of a lot of sense to me if you said, look, in early voting, you wanted 15 sites per precinct, and maybe that's the bar. If you find additional ones, great, because more sites are better. You find additional ones, great. You add them proportionally. So if you find one, you add 3 others for the other precincts. Is there any metric that your office uses to try to balance amongst the precincts where they are? Because our precincts are drawn with roughly the same population, so we should have the same number of sites, for equal access to the citizens across Tarrant County.
That is part of what we do in trying to get balance, because we're trying to give everybody equal access. And you mentioned this, the struggle is finding these early voting locations. We are asking a school, a church, a business owner to give us a space sufficient enough to conduct voting for 12 straight days. And those 12 days, the first 5 are 8-hour days. The Saturday is a 12-hour day. The Sunday is a 6-hour day. And then the next 5 voting days are another 12-hour days. So that is a struggle that we have in finding these polling locations, especially we have such a large population, and our population has been expanding. Oh, I apologize. Has been expanding and growing, and so there are some areas on the outskirts where there didn't used to be lots of population, and we don't have a lot of polling locations out there. And we are always looking when my staff is driving around and they just see something new, they will stop in. It is a struggle that we combat all year.
Do you solicit input from the parties on locations? Are you proposed sites by the parties?
We don't propose them by the
Or
parties.
do the parties propose them to you?
If they find a location or bring a location to us, then we go and look and do our inspections.
They're free to make that recommendation at any time.
That is correct.
And you will look at them through the lens of the criteria you just said.
Correct.
If it makes sense. Now, your recommendation, I apologize I wasn't here last Tuesday. I had a prior commitment, or last Wednesday, special meeting. Your recommendation was for 50 sites. And now we have 3 new recommendations. What is your recommendation as far as to operate a fair, free, efficient, and effective election? What is your opinion as our elections administrator? Because what I see, fair, equal, balanced amongst the precincts, that would be my priority. I care quite literally not much for where the actual sites are. But your team has to go operate this election. And so if you say that having compressed sites, or that in a population center you need more than one that's closer than a mile away from each other, that's your recommendation. So what is Elections Administrator Clint Ludwig's recommendation?
So the recommendation that I gave last Tuesday was the carryover from the last November election. Those sites worked. We were able to conduct the election. Therefore, I did not make any change. Now, I simply
So hang on one second. When you say didn't make any change, this was from when?
last November. We used
November of 23.
23, correct?
There
the
was no
constitutional.
change of any kind from November of 23 early voting to this proposed early
The
voting?
one change was the location that dropped out in Junior League, and then we added the Dalworthington Garden. That is
Okay,
the
but
change.
just so we're clear, that's not quite accurate what you said.
Correct,
So
there was the one
It was not
location.
the exact same from November of 23. One dropped out. It's now been added back, but just to
Yes.
clarify.
And so, from my point of view, I need early voting location sites to go make this happen. Any of these options, my office stands ready to go execute and give the citizens of Tarrant County the best election we can.
Well, in your opinion, though, Clint, is more better? That's my question. I would hope, so I mean, as these sites stand, I would hope that in the future you make a better effort to equally balance them amongst the precincts, because your original list of 50 was not equally balanced. But as it stands, they're not balanced. I would hope in the future that you bring those back, but we have the sites we have today as you're recommending. Now, you sent over a list yesterday that was 51 sites. So I don't quite know. I'm a little confused on your recommendation as our elections expert and our elections administrator on what you believe is best. Is it more sites? Is it less sites? Is it sites not within a mile of each other? It's all your recommendation that I'm trying to get to, Clint. So if you can provide that to me, I would be thankful.
Okay, well,
No, I'm asking you to-
He's asking you something, yeah.
Oh, I apologize, the commissioner wanted to speak.
I'll get her as soon
So
as.
clearly, in order for running the elections, more sites in the right locations is preferable, so we don't have long lines and everybody has equal access. That is what we prefer to do. Looking at the distance and travel, we are able to handle the volumes at the locations with any one of the recommendations that we've done.
Okay, so more is better. Okay, so to me, it's pretty clear. Tarrant County is an incredible place. I mean, this is the best place in the world because of our conservative policies, not politics. Because of our conservative results, not rhetoric, and because of our conservative values, not voting locations.
So,
I make a motion that we approve the 51 sites that Clint has recommended, and in the next cycle, I would hope that you have some more objective criteria that equally balances them.
okay,
But I
so-
move that we approve the 51
So he's made a
sites.
motion of 51, and you can make a motion for whatever you want. He did not just recommend 51 sites. So he didn't recommend 51.
Well, my motion then is the 51 sites he sent us yesterday in email.
So here is a couple of points that I want to make. But before I do, Commissioner Simmons had her hand up.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Judge. First of all, do we have a motion on the floor?
Commissioner Ramirez just made a motion to approve 51 locations, which I would assume means the 50 that Mr. Ludwig presented last time, plus the one he has added at the former junior league.
Okay, so yeah, I'm trying to get clarification on that. So, Commissioner Ramirez, so your motion is to approve the list that was presented last week with the addition of the substitute for junior league. Is that correct?
Correct. The list we were emailed yesterday by Elections Administrator Ludwig. Yeah.
So, Mr. Ludwig, is the list that you emailed, is that the list that you presented last week?
That is every location last week plus the one that we were able to add to fill the void created by the junior league no longer being a location.
Okay, I second that motion.
All right, so we have a motion and a second. Now, I have some comments and some points. You presented option one, which option one eliminates 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 locations because at each of those 5 locations that you have removed, and I will read them out, UTA, Southwest Baptist Theological Seminary, Tarrant County College Northeast, Tarrant County College South, and Southwest Community Center, you put that in place because each one of those locations is less than 1.5 miles from another location.
That is correct.
Okay.
And it had lower turnout than
And
the
it
location.
had lower turnout than
Correct.
the one it was next to.
Correct.
Okay. So let's look at this statistically. So in November of 22, Texas voter turnout by age between the ages of 18 and 24 was 5.74%. That means age 25 until however old we have a human being in Tarrant County or in Texas, 94.26% of voters are over the age of 24. In November of 2020, you have 8.6% of 18 to 24-year-olds voted in that election, meaning 91.4% of voters are over the age of 24. Now, I don't know the answer to this question, and I would venture to guess no one else in the room knows the answer to this question, but of that age 18, and I am well aware there are people that are not age 18 to 24 that go to college, and I am well aware that there are people that are 18 to 24 that are not able-bodied, but what would you guess is the percentage of 18 to 24 that actually goes to college? Is it 50%? I doubt it. Let's say it is, just for purposes of our discussion. In November of 22, that would tell you that approximately 2.8% of the voters were college students. 2.8%. In November of 20, if you look at the same stat, assuming 50%, which I think is too high, that would tell you that 4.3% were college-age voters. Yet the list that you provided, 16% of the early voting locations are on college campuses. So if you want to talk about suppressing voters, this suppresses senior citizens. So if you look at the age of 65, be quiet or you will be removed. The end. It's not going to happen again. So you literally are talking about in both elections, 27.16% of the people 65 and up, and 23.2% of 65 and up were our voters. How many senior centers are on the list? 3. There's over 30 senior centers in Tarrant County. So when I hear talk of voter suppression of students, the most able-bodied people of any demographic that can vote, we're literally talking about, when you go to option 1, one college is 0.3 miles from another early voting location. One college, depending on how you want to measure it, is less than a mile. And if you actually measure it, it's a hair farther walk from that college campus to the Arlington Sub-Courthouse than it is from this building to the end of Sundance Square. That's literally how close we're talking. And we're saying we must have them at 8 college campuses. So, well, why not 16 college campuses? Why not every single college campus? Why not 200 early voting locations? Because at some point we have to consider money. And every single time we have one of these locations, it's at least $10,000. But there are speakers today, and I'm sure some of them will speak on it. So we had an election judge contact us at least a year ago, telling us at one of these locations that it is constant fighting with the people that work at the institution, constant fighting with students who try to vote that aren't registered, students that try to vote who aren't registered in Tarrant County. But I guess the way I look at this is, I've heard all the chatter about voter suppression. If there's actual voter suppression going on from requiring a college kid who may not be even registered in Tarrant County to walk the equivalent of about 0.6 of a mile to vote, and that you're suppressing their vote if you don't allow it, is literally the most ludicrous thing I've ever heard. When you're talking, let's talk about the city of Keller. The city of Keller has more voters turn out to the early voting location than I think any other location in the county year after year after year. Keller is 18.4 square miles. They have one location for early voting, one. The city of Southlake, where I live, has a robust turnout. It's 22 square miles. It has one location. So, as I mentioned last week, and I offer this to Commissioner Simmons, keep UTA, take out Arlington Sub-Courthouse, take out UTA, keep Arlington Sub-Courthouse, doesn't matter to me, pick one. I don't believe college campuses are inviting to everyone and are easily accessible to the public. But whether they are or they aren't, having 2 right next to each other seems grossly unfair to people in Keller, people in Southlake. Southlake 22 square miles, Keller 18.4 square miles. There's 6 locations in Arlington. That's an average of 1 location every 16 square miles. Now, if we're talking about fairness in where we have voting locations, let's look at Election Day. So Election Day, the plan you presented us last week, whenever that was, had 100 voting locations on Election Day in Precinct 1. It had 80 in Precinct 2. I think it had 82 in your precinct. So if we're wanting equal, who's defining equal? That's not equal. And it's also not equal to have 16% of our early voting locations at locations that are obviously targeted to try to get out the college vote. If that's not what it's doing, then why don't we have locations at Lockheed, Bell, GM? They should be. And the other thing that I haven't even addressed is, by and large, every one of these colleges, with the exception of TCU, is pretty much a commuter college. So very few housing on any of these campuses we're talking about. So they have to live somewhere, and there are, I think, hundreds, if not thousands, of apartments at UTA that are located closer to the Arlington Sub-Courthouse than they are to UTA. So those are points I wanted to make.
Judge.
Yes?
I'm sorry to interrupt. Whenever you have a moment, Commissioner Simmons says she has
Sure.
some comments.
Those are points I wanted to make. We are obviously not trying to make it easier for senior citizens to vote by the way we're choosing senior centers versus colleges, even though they are, depending on which election you want to look at, 5 times more, 3 times more. And at the end of the day, this is partisan. We know it's partisan. Let's not pretend like it isn't. We know why the Democrats are here. I mean, we're not trying to fool anybody. The way I'm looking at it is I'm trying to be efficient and I'm trying to make sure we're saving money. So if I was trying to eliminate UTA, then I could just say eliminate UTA. I don't care whether it's the Arlington Civil Courthouse or UTA. I don't care whether it is Southwest Baptist Theological Seminary or the one that's 3/10 of a mile from that. I just don't think it's right or fair for people in one part of the county to have a voting location every 22 miles, and for people in another part of the county, not coincidentally Democrat precincts, to have locations less than half a mile apart. I don't think that's fair, and I'm trying to do what's fair. All right, Commissioner Simmons.
Thank you, Judge. So several things. First, Commissioner Ramirez was asking the same question that I have. Methodology. I don't see that we have a methodology to determine which sites are selected. Not much spelled out. I mean, because let's just go back to last week. Mr. Ludwig, you presented a list of early voting sites, 49 of 50 of which we have used in the last several election cycles with no controversy. That list received 2 votes from this court with Commissioner Ramirez's absence. Now, given that that list received 2 votes from court members with 1 court member not present, the logical thing for you to do, in my opinion, Clint, would be to present today a clean original option here. And we've chosen not to do that, but Commissioner Ramirez took care of that, and I have seconded. Now, at the Commissioner's Court, you were asked by the judge to provide your opinion of how many early voting sites we need here in Tarrant County. Your response was, and I quote, "For this election, as many as we can get if we want to process the voters in a timely manner and not have long lines and inconvenience." You were then asked by the judge to try to nail down a number. You responded, and I quote again, "If we could get to probably 60 to 70 based on the numbers and the weights, I think that would reduce it." Now, today you propose these 3 new options. And let me go back to some things that the judge pointed out. Because we don't have methodology, at least I haven't seen it, because last week we had a list that's worked for several cycles, and then we leave that meeting, now we have an emergency meeting or a call meeting, and now we have new options. Where is the methodology? With regard to the number of sites in the different precincts, the precincts don't have the same density, I would argue. I mean, the population per square mile. So you have to look at that. Money is not an issue because labor costs are already budgeted. In election year 2020, the election contract labor budget was 1.9 for the, or I think it was 5.2 for the 5.2 million for less than 50 sites. And today it's 1.9. So we've already budgeted for this. What it's budgeted for. We went with what the professional staff, Clint and his staff, put in his budget, and that's what we're voting on. So UTA has been a site for, I think, 15, 16 years. I'm just, this sounds like manufactured chaos. I'm not sure why we're here, why we're making a big deal out of this. The elections administrator, the professional that has been hired, has told us last week, told us again today, that he needs more sites. Show us where it says they have to be 1.5 miles apart. Show us that. Show us some methodology. Show us something. And to me, you got to compare it to presidential versus presidential. That's all I have for now.
Judge. Yeah, I will disagree on one thing there, Commissioner. I agree with Judge O'Hara that, balanced by population, we should have the same number of polling sites in a perfect world in each precinct. Whether that's 20, 25, I don't know what that perfect number is for Elections Administrator Ludwig, but certainly, and again, the site-specific where they are is of lesser importance to me. It's just having access to the same number. That's equal and that's fair. The reason why my motion is what it is obviously we're in a time crunch here, and Administrator Ludwig doesn't have the time to go source 10 other sites to add here to balance these early voting sites. But in a perfect world, that's where we would get to, and have objective methodology for why each site is selected. To me, again, it should not be controversial to have as many sites as possible. We need to provide free and fair access so long as it fits within what you've asked for in a budget year over year. You've asked for $4 million this year for early voting, correct?
For the presidential election.
For the presidential election. And how much are you projecting to spend based on a 51 site estimate?
We're going to get close to the $4 million for the whole budget.
Okay. So that hits your budget. So when you say you need 60 or 70, you would have to increase the budget to get there?
Correct.
Okay, so that you budgeted for 50 sites?
Yes, because that's what we had available. If you remember, it was late last year or early this year, depending on how you want to look at it. I did go around and speak to all the commissioners about the need to find more polling locations. It is something we're trying to address. I understand that the numbers and there is some discrepancy and some disparity, but I can only build with the blocks that I have. And we have worked very hard to get our blocks and to build what we can. And like I said, we appreciate the assistance from the commissioners in finding locations, the parties and their suggestions.
Well, I was about to say that were you recognizing her?
Well, I was just saying I understand she wants to talk. Keep going.
Oh, okay. No, I recognize that they provide input, and I think that's the appropriate time to provide input from everybody is on the front end. But whenever you dilute your recommendations and bring them to us, you should have objective criteria that you consider from all of the recommendations that are given to you by everybody. So I would hope that in the future, each party that has specific recommendations, whether it's senior centers or anything else, that they give them to you and that you provide those recommendations to us. So I think there's an opportunity for that to try to balance these things out, but it sounds like you need a better system to funnel recommendations into.
That would be great help if the community could rally around some of these sites and bring us some locations that they're willing to, because I have a staff of 43 people, and we've ran 5 elections so far just this year. We cannot dedicate all of our time to looking at maps and driving around, trying and knocking on doors, trying to find, will you let us be here? It's just not possible. So we're building with what we have. We do not turn down any recommendation without looking at it, vetting it. We look at the populations, we look at voter numbers, we look at the distance to other locations. This year, it became a little bit difficult with the election day sites because of the statute and the simple fact I have to have, by law, 347 locations. And we are already down to 349 because of the 350. A church contacted us yesterday and has dropped out. So these things happen. And because we have to hit some numbers, it is not as easy to be as objective with the criteria when you have to meet certain things.
Now, is that because of the change? I mean, did we have these struggles? I know you weren't here, but you probably know the history. Did we have these same struggles prior to countywide voting, or has it shifted to make it more difficult for you?
So the countywide polling isn't necessarily the struggle. It's the population growth, and so therefore the number of locations that we have to have now. Whether it's precinct-based countywide, we have to have a lot of locations the way the law is written. And that sheer number of locations could cause us to have them stacked right on top of each other.
We're talking about the law. You're talking about election day now, right?
Election day, correct.
Not early voting.
Early voting, no. Election day.
There's no statutory minimum for early voting, right?
I must have one at my location, and then I can't remember if it's every commissioner precinct or every legislative district has to have at least one. Off the top of my head, can't remember which it is. So I think our minimum is 5.
Okay,
But I'd have to go back and consult.
Election day, statutorily, you have to have a certain number, but early voting, you do not have to have 50, 45. You don't have to have a certain number.
That is correct.
Okay.
All right, so before we get to Commissioner Simmons, the point I wanted to make is when anyone says, well, the more the better, the more police, the better. Some may disagree with that, but we're not going to fund an additional 500 officers. We have to also take into consideration budget constraints, property taxes, and the like. So if you need more locations, you can come back and say we need more locations. I cannot come up with a rational reason why having 2 locations 3/10 of a mile from each other helps solve we don't have enough locations, other than to just say we have we have another location. I would venture to guess there's almost no one that wants to vote in this election that won't vote because they have to go an additional 3/10 of a mile. I would say the same thing about if you have to go 9/10 of a mile. If people want to vote, and we're not talking about making it difficult to vote. There are 12 days of early voting. There are 347 voting locations on election day. There is curbside voting. There is mail-in voting that takes place for how long is mail-in voting?
Roughly, start 45 days out, roughly.
I mean, it's literally 45 days. So these notions and arguments that it's making it harder to vote are just nonsense. It is incredibly easy to vote. And if a college kid can't walk across the street to vote or drive across the street, they can absolutely unequivocally go get curbside voting if they're disabled. What we ought to be doing is putting more at senior centers where it's harder for those people to get there. And it's harder for people of advanced age to walk and ambulate. That's what we ought to be doing. So, Commissioner Simmons.
Thank you. So for seniors, they do have the opportunity to vote by mail. So that's certainly an accommodation that is offered. Once again, we did not start this additional work. These lists should have been approved last meeting. UTA has a population greater than Keller. So we cannot remove population density from the discussion just to say, let's have 5 here, 5 in precinct 1, 5 on sites in 2, 5 in 3, and 5 in 4. I mean, we can't, that's not reasonable. We did not try to manipulate the sites. We are not asking BDRs to sit outside county buildings. We simply, I simply want access for everyone and sites not to be removed on arbitrary criteria. That's why I keep saying methodology. If you want, you know, I've heard this Keller argument. There's only one site in Keller. Well, your commissioner can say, you know, we need another site in Keller. And I'll tell you too that the Arlington Sub Courthouse is a busy site, and Clint can speak to that. It gets so maxed out that when you close the one mile from it, you'll hurt that one. So the point of some of those sites is to alleviate surrounding sites.
Okay, we've had a number of comments from court members. We have a number of speakers. I have 2 people who made requests to speak.